Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mental Health Matters with your host, Dr. Matt Gloviak. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you're staying well and healthy amidst the COVID 19 pandemic. Today, it's with great pleasure that I introduce special guest Vanessa Cook, who is an instructional coach and one of the local school districts. Vanessa, it's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thank you. Well, how about we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself? You're an instructional coach at a local school district. What exactly does that entail?
My job is to help the teachers be better teachers. So just like any coach, a football coach or a basketball coach, I'm that support to help them be their best self and to help them with their teaching practice.
Excellent. So you're kind of the teacher's teacher, if you will.
Yes, yes.
Great. And you have a very positive personality, and I've enjoyed all the conversations that we've had in
Thank
the
you.
past, and I cannot thank you enough, for being here during this time.
Thank
Now, today the topic that we're going to be discussing is a little bit heavier and one that's extremely overdue. As you know, throughout everything that's been going on during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've also had a lot of civil unrest. It's created a lot of uproars in our communities. We've seen a lot of peaceful protests. We've seen some unpeaceful protests, a lot of law, litigation. A lot of changes are happening in our communities right now. I was wondering from your perspective, how do you feel about the things that are going on at this time?
Um, I feel like the things that are going on or kind of inevitable to happen in
Hmm.
some way, only because trauma that's unchecked. Even as a teacher, I've dealt with a lot of trauma with the students, but unchecked trauma leads to outbursts. And with COVID-19, um, and with the video of George Floyd
Hmm.
and everyone being home to see the video, I think those two combined is what caused it. And it's a lesson to be learned, and we can move forward from this together.
Absolutely. And as you were saying, this is something that's been long overdue,
Hmm.
especially now in the day of social media where information travels at literally the speed of light.
Yeah.
We're seeing more and more videos of police brutality, other types of racist actions that are taking place. And, for a long time, I think that the wool was really pulled over people's eyes thinking, well,
Hmm.
racism doesn't exist. There's no more segregation. We've had the civil rights movement. This is something that doesn't exist in my community. But it
Hmm.
seems like it's just been something that's been covered up for quite a while. And now all of a sudden, with everything that we've got going on, even Breonna Taylor, and like you said with George Floyd, now we've had this big uproar of what's been going on. It's long overdue.
Hmm. It's like we sort of live in two different worlds.
Mm.
So as a product of Chicago, where Chicago is very segregated, um, there's a different relationship with police officers and communities. Their presence is heavy, so from a young age, they're there, and I've seen many cousins that would just be slammed onto police cars and kind of questioned without, and then kind of like, as a man, you could see the hurt in their eyes when that would happen to them, and as a child, you're taught in school that police officers are community helpers,
Mm.
but what you're seeing on a daily basis is not necessarily correlating with what you're taught. So there's like, and I have police officers in my family. So it's like we want to believe that they're there to help us, but if they're showing us something different in our everyday life, you grow up and these things still replay in your mind. Even though you know that they're there to serve and protect, if they've shown you differently throughout your lifetime, it's kind of hard to like just put that to the wayside. And you know that because you work with mental health.
Hmm.
It's something you put in the back of your mind, but it's always present. And I think that we could all do better with mending that relationship. Um, you know, when slavery ended and the civil rights movement kind of was present, the police were not our friends,
Hmm. No,
They
absolutely.
kind of kept us in check when we tried to vote or do other things. So when these things happen in cycles, right? So now they have children and their children have children. And it's not like we just wake up and not have certain views. Like with anything, it's generational. And so I think it starts here now with the current young people, that we break the cycles of those things, and we truly go back to like being a community where children can trust, and we can can all live with those First Amendment rights of just walking down the street and not being stopped and things like that.
Well, that's certainly the way that it should be. And, from what you were saying, I was picking up in terms of, incongruency. The police are supposed to be there for help, but what you're seeing is something completely different. I think as a nation, there are so many communities where this has just been kept hush-hush. You're unable to see it, and what we don't see, we don't think exists.
Exactly.
And I do want to touch back on that one moment, but you'd made the statement as far as we understand how mental health works, so I want to take a mental health moment on this as well. So like you said, this is something that's been going on for generations. Since the time of slavery, you really learn that, the police officers, people of authority aren't necessarily there to help. And also taking a look at it and seeing, well, white man, the dominant population, these are individuals who are against us, and we need to formulate our own communities and so on. You see time and time again, there's a lot of great white people out there, I hope I'm included in that part, but, with that being said though, years and years and years, and this is where systemic institutional racism comes in, if you will, is that, after generations and generations of this happening again and again, you start to create these types of defense mechanisms. You have to protect yourself. And when you realize that, okay, well, the police, if I get arrested, even on a small little charge or for something I didn't do, it's likely they're going to throw the book at me. I'm going to be in jail for decades because I had a hit of marijuana on me or something to that type of equivalent. So you end up going out in life, being fearful of what's going on, and then after so long, that fear starts to turn into resentment, which turns into rage, and it just builds and builds and builds over time. Now, one of the things we have to keep in mind is, beliefs and values. What are our core beliefs and values? And these are the things that are really ingrained in us, from birth onward, especially during those formative years when you're going through critical stages of development in childhood. You're learning from your parents, you're learning from your pastor, your teachers, your community, and so on. And these things that you do start to believe are real start to formulate the way that you perceive the world. They start to formulate the things that go on in your head, those automatic thoughts, if you will. Now, if the automatic thoughts are becoming negative, and my belief is that the police are bad, my belief is that, white people are against us, my belief is that, we're never going to be able to get ahead and we're going to continually have to do this, well, then you're going to act accordingly. That only makes sense. And that's why some of the behaviors that we do see, are literally stemming from that. And it's one of those types of situations we can't just snap our finger and make it go away, because it's going to take time, because this has been happening for centuries now. And it's going to take just about that amount of time or longer to fix it. However, there are things we could be doing now.
Exactly. I think it starts with education, right? And it starts with breaking the cycles from all ends. Even from the Black perspective, is breaking that cycle of distrust and knowing that. And I feel that my experiences have molded me into who I am, because I was always around a lot of diversity growing up, where everyone doesn't have that experience. I've met people that have only gone to school with Black people. I've met white people who have only gone to school with white people. And until you get those, and I've gone to school with different types of people, and until you get those firsthand experiences with knowing that what you read about people is not necessarily to be true, right? So despite what your grandparents have told you about certain groups of people or anyone else, when you get those firsthand experiences where you're around different type of people, you really get to learn people for their character.
Absolutely.
That old saying, their character and not the color of their skin. And when you're not in that situation, then it becomes a point where you have to kind of try to self-educate. But what doesn't help is pretending that it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So like the George Floyd video, it shocked a lot of people, but it didn't shock me. I've seen police do those type of things. And I hate to say it a lot, even as a child. Let that resonate, right? So even as a child, I could be sitting on my front porch and I could see the police jump out the car and slam someone and tell them, obscenities, like they weren't even, a human. And the response of other people to kind of be like, that happens? It happens all the time. And that's what's the shocking part. And maybe it took for COVID and us all to be home for us to realize, like, this is an issue. And I'm very proud of how many people attended the marches and came together and said, yeah, enough is enough. But why wasn't enough when, Trayvon Martin, all he had was a hoodie on, and he just looked suspect. And he got off for killing somebody's teenage child. And we need to come to understanding that if that teenage child looked a certain way, he would still be alive, because there would not have been an issue with him being in the neighborhood. But the scary part is us, like, making excuses for somebody's child to die.
Well, absolutely.
And we need to kind of,
Well, absolutely, and I think that's something that a lot of people really don't realize. And I've talked about this before. In our next episode, I'll talk about it a little bit further. But growing up in a diverse community, I mean, that really is a great opportunity for you to really get to know people of different colors, different cultural beliefs, religions, so on and so forth. In respect, it almost set me up for disadvantage. As I get older, I go to school and I'm examining my white privilege. I was very defensive about it. Didn't really understand racism. I'm like, well, I grew up in a town that's about 1/3 white, 1/3 black, 1/3 Hispanic, and a mix of all these different races. I don't really get it, and I had no idea what was going on. And I really started doing my research, and even today I took a look at the U.S. Census Bureau, the 2019 numbers. In the United States of America, the black population makes up only 13.4%. And there are certain communities where there really is no diversity whatsoever. I was working with a student who was in a northeastern corridor of the United States of America. He made a statement, in my state it's 95.8% white. I'm like, well, how are you really going to learn about diversity when you're in a state that's a majority, vast majority, less than 5% is any other type of diversity whatsoever. And I think because of that, people really aren't seeing what's going on. And what we know, especially media, where the information is traveling, we can be very selective, how you were talking about earlier.
Sure.
What we read in the history books, the stories people tell us aren't necessarily true. In the media, they're at the liberty to present whatever information they want us to see and hide the stuff they don't want us to see. We see, like, at the major news stations and major broadcasting stations, most of those folks are white individuals. A lot of the people who are running these big companies, the movie studios, so on and so forth, are white individuals putting their own spin on the reality of what it is that's going on. So it's really hard for a lot of people, especially well-intended people, to really understand what's happening because they are ignorant to it. But ignorance isn't an excuse.
yeah. Gotcha.
Ignorance is not an excuse.
For sure. And I think that's, so what I struggle with is when I've had great conversations with a lot of people because I do have such a diverse group of friends. What I struggle with is that the people that constant thing of, like, well, slavery ended a long time ago. And, like, I don't think this is even a real, I think it's kind of made up, because if you just listened, right? If you just listened, you wouldn't get shot. But if you think about that, instead of you wanting to make things better, you just want to leave it at that. Like, if you listen, you would have not been shot. A lot of people don't listen. A lot of people don't listen. I have friends from all backgrounds. I've seen a lot of people from different cultures use drugs, not listen to police officers. It's the reactions that we want to change. Give this person a second chance at life. Is it because you don't see the value in the life? You know what I mean? Is it because you have that bias where you fear, for some reason, that this person will do something or overpower you, that they're not given the second chance at life? Now, we're not saying that criminals should get away with being criminals, but they should make it to the jailhouse, just like everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not only make it to the jailhouse, which is a right that everybody should be entitled to be safely transported over there. And remember, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Yes.
So we're removing due process and everything here as well. But also take into consideration the level of rehabilitation that should be happening inside the jails. So we have folks who are coming in, blacks, other minorities, going to the jail system. We're not working on remediation. Instead, we treat them at a subhuman level, don't give them any of the skills, don't work on the mental health, and then just after so many years, boom, you're free to go out again. What do you do with your life? And all the while, these individuals who are incarcerated have children, spouses, parents, grandparents who are always depending on them, and that person's not there, and then comes out and their lives have gone on, but they didn't have the support, and now they're struggling. And again, this is the cycle that continually repeats itself, and we need to see this. And I really think, on Netflix, like 13th was a really great documentary that they showed, or like the new Jim Crow, really explaining that although segregation, technically it was removed, well, now what we're doing is we're racistly, upping charges on people who are having minimal offenses, putting them in jail, locking them away, labeling them as criminals, and we all go on about our days like nothing happened. It has to stop.
And now marijuana is legal because it's helping people get more money. Well, there's plenty
Huge
of
tax benefit, yes.
And there's people in jail for very small amounts of marijuana for years that should probably be released. So we need to stop making those type of decisions that just benefit the rich.
Absolutely.
And actually that benefit the people. And when it comes to jail and like the overpopulation of, there's the saying of the absent black father, he's more likely to go to jail, right? And he's more likely to get a longer charge than anybody else. And if jail is truly a correctional facility, why is it that when they get out of jail, they can't get a job? The first question is, are you a convicted felon? Yes or no? And if you are, you can't get a job, right? So eventually he does something to make money and goes back to jail, and it's like a vicious cycle of that. If they're living in certain type of housing, the father can't live with the family. But that's where Black Lives Matter comes in, because would you make that, if you knew how this trickle effect of giving this person this sentence would affect their family, their children, and everything else, would you still do it? And I want to go back to, I don't think that criminals should get away with things, but make it equal. So if you're going to hit this black man with a 20-year charge for marijuana, the same should happen for every culture.
Absolutely.
But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing, college students getting off for rape. The guy from like the athlete in the college that, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but they got off for rape. But then plenty of men who have done the bare minimum and have served years and also have to carry a felony.
Absolutely.
And it's like the difference between having a public defender and a well-paid lawyer. And that's basically, and we try to pretend like it's all morals. It's not all morals.
Oh, absolutely not.
If it was all morals, it would be a lot more people of different races in jail.
Absolutely, and people pay settlement fees all the time for major crimes, including murder, and nobody even ends up hearing about it.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. It needs to change. It needs to be equal for everybody. Now, specific to Black Lives Matter, so I've been hearing, a lot of noise about this. People going back and forth about the Black Lives Matter movement. Is it trying to go against All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, all this, type of stuff that's going on? What are your thoughts there?
When I first heard All Lives Matter, I thought that was interesting, only because I never seen a protest to a protest, right? I think the title of the movement, Black Lives Matters, bothers people, but they do, right? So I had to talk to a few people and kind of understand why do you guys feel the need to say all lives matter? I think we know that, right? So we know in general all people's lives matters, right? So whoever designed the Black Lives Matter movement, I think they chose a title for that movement that would cause reaction, which it has. But right away, people say all lives matter. Not giving it a second thought. Oh no, how dare you? All lives matter. But the name of the movement is not only Black Lives Matters. And I've seen both sides of it. I've seen plenty of white people that are fine with the name of it. And the difference I see is like what they've experienced. If that makes sense.
It makes plenty of
I
sense.
see some of my friends who have been very honest with me and say like, I grew up in a very small town and then they're like, no, all lives matter. Where the ones that have grew up around a lot more diverse, they have no problem saying Black Lives Matter. I think that blue lives matter, all lives matter, but at this point in time, I feel like we just needed people to say Black Lives Matter. If that makes
No,
sense.
but that's
Okay.
exactly the point. No,
Okay.
that's exactly the
Okay.
point, and that's what I was really wanting to get at there with
Yeah.
that statement. And that I think a lot of people just really, you say Black Lives Matter, and like you said, you wanted to have something that would cause a reaction, something that
Yeah.
would get a spark, controversy, people start talking about it.
Mhm.
But it's almost like it's saying, Black Lives Matter too. Like, hey, don't
Yeah.
forget about
Don't
us. Like,
forget.
hey, we're being brutalized out in the streets. We're being sent to jail for
Mhm.
decades for minor offenses. Our schools are impoverished. Single
Mhm.
parents are unable to take care of their kids. My children don't have a place to play. They're using school books that are 20 years old. And I can go down the list. And nobody in this country should be fearful to walk down the street and
Mhm.
believe that somebody who's there to protect them is going to harm them. But the reality is that it is the truth.
Mhm.
And it is important to have a statement like that because, again, Black Lives Matter isn't saying that other lives don't matter. I was going through on social media and I saw a really great example. And they were showing a firefighter that was going up to a house and spraying the house or something, and this random person runs up to him. He's like, hey, all houses matter. It's like, well, this is the house on fire right now, so
Yeah.
this house matters the most.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the point that we're trying to make here.
Mhm.
With Black Lives Matter, is that you all have been, discriminated against for so long, not given an equal share, and hey, we need to be able to rise above. We have to be able to work together in this effort, and your lives do matter. They're not insignificant. We should all be equal, but when you're not getting the attention that you deserve, like a basic human right, guess what? Yeah, we need to speak loudly, speak proudly, and so on. So that is a really great movement. And I really do believe that most people who, state that all lives matter, especially when I've had the conversations with them, I do believe a lot of it's out of ignorance, but at the same time, too, a lot of the comments are just blatantly racist as well because,
Mhm.
well, I don't care. Keep it going the way it is. But we can't continue moving forward the way it is because it's not right. And there are a lot of things that have been unsaid, unresolved for so many years. And I regret that it took until having a COVID-19 pandemic for
Mhm.
everything to just really explode. But guess what? Maybe that is the silver lining in what we've got going on right now, and that
Mhm.
we're talking about things that are very important. And we need to do a better job as a country. We can go
Mhm.
on about the Hispanic community and ISIS and everything that's going on there. It's just there's a major flaw with what we've got going on,
Mhm.
and it's really disturbing to continually see our national leaders, the wealthy, and so on, just exacerbating it further by using inappropriate rhetoric and so on. It's just really disturbing to sit and watch.
And still have many supporters that agree. So, and I think the key is like to always have they they wanted people to always have in the back of their mind. So when you approach a black man, when you pull him over, remember this is somebody's father, this is somebody's son, this is somebody's uncle. His life matters. Like that's what just when you look at a black child, remember he can't be a doctor, he can't be a lawyer one day. His life does matter. And I think that's where that slogan came from. Like that we should all have in the back of our mind that the person you may be shooting right now may be innocent, is somebody's child, and his life does matter just as much as anybody else's. So um, I think that's also what that stemmed from. As far as I do feel like it's the history and the generational things we're taught. You kind of spoke on when people are like they're fine with the way things are. Of course they are. If you were in power,
Oh,
you would be you
absolutely.
would be
Oh,
fine as well.
absolutely. Everything's
So,
just going hunky dory. Nothing's wrong. Exactly. And you don't want the power taken away. People who are in
uh-huh,
power want to keep it.
hmm
And this is what ends up happening and doing anything you can to cover up the reality of the situation.
because that's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable to give someone um, equality in something you've always dominated. In anything. Nobody wants to give their power in anything, but you never hear the good things, right? You never hear things like black people built the countries for free. They built the country for free. They built the buildings for free. It's always the conversation of what we're doing wrong in the communities. Never the acknowledgement of that the country was built off of like free labor.
Mhm.
Um, and that should be enough to have the equal rights.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
another thing too that I think where a lot of people miss the point. We talk
Mhm.
about restitution, or we have affirmative action, things like that, and people are like, well, slaves hundreds of years ago, it's not going on right now. Why should we be giving people money and all this? And again, trying to sweep it under the table, but you're missing the big picture of what is going on. Again, like you were just saying here, I mean, the society has literally been built to keep people who are not in the dominant category impoverished, not equal, so on and so forth. Literally, when they were sitting there and they're building the wealthier subdivisions and communities, school districts, and so on, would literally go highlight the wealthier communities, build the bigger schools, and these are the impoverished ones, stick them here. And all the impoverished ones were all minority type communities. And again, giving them resources that are extremely outdated. It's hard to get ahead when you're so far behind to really begin with. And even if you worked equally as hard, as a white man doing whatever type of effort, you'd probably still be way behind. You can work twice as hard and still maybe be half as behind. 4 times harder, now maybe you're starting to catch up. But that's not the way the world should be, especially when we're talking about the American dream, the land of the free, and so on. And it's very sad and disturbing and quite honestly sickening to me that in 2020, that we're still having to have these types of debates and everything. But it's important that we do educate people, feel comfortable talking about a very uncomfortable topic, and just really make it known. And every single time these types of things happen, make them public, make the voices
For
heard,
sure,
because
yeah.
everybody does, deserve to have their voices heard.
And just put yourself in it, just for one moment, try to put in the back of your mind everything you've been taught, everything you've watched on TV, and just use like a little common sense, right? So slaves were freed, and then what happened? We're free. You're free.
And you had
You
nowhere to
have
go.
nothing.
Yeah, you
You
have
have no
nothing.
jobs. You have nothing. You have nowhere to live. So that took hundreds of years to even like come out of. And then you go to a ghetto where you all live together. You barely make any money. So it's still hundreds of years. And so when people don't understand, well, slavery ended a long time ago. Why aren't black people way ahead? You guys had a 400-year head start. It's going to take time to catch up. But at the same time, put everything in the back of your mind and just think about, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, if this was your child, if your child was Tamir Rice and he was playing with a BB gun, would he get shot point blank from a police officer? I can almost guarantee he wouldn't. If it was like, just a very suburban area, it would kind of be like, hey, like, would someone even call the police because a 12-year-old had a BB gun? So that's when if you have common sense in a soul, that should bother you.
Oh, absolutely. And I hate to end this here, but I see that we're running out of time.
Okay.
But really, thank you for a very thoughtful conversation. I hope that everybody who was viewing was able to take something away from this. Please do stay tuned for our second episode that we'll be doing here together. We're going to actually talk about being an ally with the Black community. So for now, thank you very much for watching Mental Health Matters. Please feel free to visit our Facebook page, give any likes, comments, feedback, and so on. You can also visit the website, www.mentalhealthmattershow.com, where you can have access to all the different videos that we've done, articles written, and so on. And also, if you'd like to be a guest on the show or have any questions for me directly, please send an email to dr.mgloviak@gmail.com. Thank you, and stay well.